Hey Fuzzbutts, I'm Silverpaw, and me and my friend Terabyte are bringing you a Kingdom Hearts fanfiction called Detention. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Detention. The word in and of itself creates different reactions amongst everyday people. For Roxas Leonhardt, the word struck a sense of fear due to the unfamiliar. Roxas had never been in detention before, not because he was a goody two-shoes in particular, more for the fact that he never really did anything wrong, just because breaking rules had never really caught his fancy. Due to his slightly lackadaisical view on life, he ended up walking into the global class 3 minutes late. That was how he ended up in the hall at school 20 minutes after the final bell rang. The door to the detention room left nothing to the imagination, due to the fact that detention was written on the door in thick black letters. He took a deep breath and reached for the door handle, pulling the door open as if expecting a lion to jump out and devour him as soon as the door was all of the way open. The room was completely empty, but for one teacher sitting at the desk at the front of the room. His head was leaned back against the whiteboard, his big black boots propped up on the desk, a magazine about guns propped in front of his face. He hardly even acknowledged Roxas's presence, so the blonde just took a seat and waited for something to happen. The bell rang loudly overhead, making Roxas jump slightly. A few seconds later, the door flew open and smacked into the wall, revealing someone Roxas had often seen around the school. He was extremely tall and skinny, almost like he could turn sideways and slip into a different dimension. Long, crimson hair spiked from his head, hanging almost to his shoulders. The red framed his pale face brilliantly, bringing attention to his eyes. They were peculiar, as far as eyes went, angled in such a way that they could be called cat-like. They were also a cat-like green color with deep dark green ringing his pupil and filtering out to become a pale green as the color reached the sclera. Underneath these particular eyes rested small black diamond tattoos, looking almost out of place amongst the rest, yet so obviously at home he could have been born with them. He sported a black lip ring and an eyebrow ring and also had a black plug in his left ear. It was an eclectic mix, and yet he wore it so well. Perhaps it was the fact that he was budding with so much confidence it could be called arrogance. Or maybe it just worked in some strange way. Either way, Roxas couldn't deny the fact that he was extremely attractive. He slammed the door shut behind him and grinned as if he had just won the lottery rather than a one-way trip to detention. "Hey there, Ziggy, how's the wife?" he greeted his voice. "Hey there, Ziggy, how's the wife?" he greeted, his voice a tad bit higher than Roxas would have expected it to be. The teacher lowered his magazine, revealing long black hair streaked with gray, pulled into a low ponytail, a big scar on his cheek and an eye patch. He was a woodshop teacher, so Roxas had never met him personally, but rumors flew around the school around him. Some people were convinced that he was a spy from Russia, but Roxas wasn't buying that. The guy sounded like a doped-up surfer, for God's sake. "Non-existent," Zigbar retorted, snapping his magazine shut. "All right, delinquent, take a seat." The redhead smirked and sat on top of the desk, bringing his legs back around to rest on the seat of the chair. Zigbar picked up a sheet of paper and glanced at it. "Right, so there are only 2 of you today. Okay, you're here, so I'm out. I'll be back at 3:30 to let you out. Do whatever you want except for committing felonies." With that, he was out the door and locking it firmly behind him. Roxas was a bit confused. Wasn't the teacher supposed to stay there and make sure they suffered for their mistakes? Not that he was really complaining, but it seemed odd. Maybe detention wasn't as bad as all the horror stories said. He shrugged, reaching in his bag and pulled out his global history homework, flipping through the packet with false interest. He meant no offense, but studying the Mongols was possibly the most boring thing in the world. He didn't really see the point, considering he'd just forget everything he learned once they moved on to the next subject anyway. Still, he tried to focus, but that was kind of hard to do when the redhead sitting across the aisle talking on his cell phone rather loudly about cactuses. Roxas almost let out a sigh of relief when the redhead cussed and informed his friend that his battery was dying. He tucked the phone into his pocket and let out a loud sigh. Roxas did his best to ignore him, focusing on the paper in front of him. "You've got to be kidding, kid! You're seriously doing the homework?" Roxas lifted his eyes from the page and scowled at him.
"I have a name, jackass,"
he snapped, leaving the other to laugh and hold his hands defensively. "God damn, kid, I don't know what your name is, so how could I possibly call you by it?"
"You could have the decency to ask,"
Roxas retorted, determined not to look at the redhead. After a few moments of silence, he sighed and gave in. Alright, what's your name?
Roxas.
Hello, Roxas. I'm Axel. Axel Sinclair. He glanced up to see the redhead Axel had his hand out for a shake. Roxas dutifully shook the hand he was being offered and turned back to his homework. After a long moment of silence, he sufficiently felt like a bastard. He could at least pretend to be interested in conversation.
So, Axel, that's an interesting name.
Yeah, my brother's name is Reno. We were named that because our parents met at a Guns N' Roses concert in Reno, Nevada.
So, you're named after Axl Rose?
Yup. Roxas let out a breath and returned to ignoring the redhead. It was a few minutes before he spoke again. Damn, you're impossible. Can't you see I'm trying to have a conversation?
Why?
Roxas interrupted, Axel looking taken aback, his eyebrows rising in disbelief. Why what?
Why are you talking to me?
Axel rolled his eyes and leaned back, studying him. Well, I don't know why I want to talk to you, okay? Maybe because you're the only one here. If you're going to be such a bitch about it, though, I won't bother.
Okay, fine. Don't then. No skin off my back.
They lapsed into another silence, in which Roxas tried to focus on Genghis Khan and ended up thinking about Axel instead. It was peculiar that Axel would want to speak to him, considering the entire community of Twilight Town ostracized him. Being the only gay kid in a small, God-fearing town would do that to you. All the guys were convinced he'd rape them if they didn't cover their asses, and all the girls were disappointed to find out that they weren't like the gay guys on TV. Roxas knew about people like Axel, and in all honesty, they annoyed him to no end. Guys like Axel were the ones whose parents were so rich that they didn't care what their kids did. As far as they were concerned, they could do whatever the hell they wanted and never be at fault. Axel was one of those guys that whined about how terrible their parents were as they drove around in several $1,000 cars, looking for the best place to get high and drink and destroy their minds before they could afford to do anything with their lives. One of the rich kids who thought they'd had it so rough because mommy wouldn't let them have the newest cell phone on the market, or some shit like that. It made Roxas sick. They were all superficial and they didn't appreciate a thing. Axel made fun of Roxas for doing the homework, but that was the big thing. Axel couldn't get into any college in the country if his daddy donated enough money. Roxas wouldn't go to college unless he could get a full ride and every scholarship he could possibly apply for. Roxas hadn't realized his fist tightening until after the pen in his hand snapped in half, splattering ink all over his hands and homework.
Damn it!
He snarled, chucking the pen in the general direction of the garbage can, watching as it bounced off the side and rolled away, leaving a trail of ink in its wake. He looked down at the page, but it was a lost cause. The ink had spread over more than half the page, leaving it ineligible. He sighed and crumpled it into a ball, tossing it across the room and sinking it in the can easily. That was a pretty good shot. You ever think of trying out for the basketball team? Axel spoke up, making yet another stab at conversation.
I used to play
He admitted.
back in middle school, but I stopped.
He determinedly stared out the window now, without something on his desk to distract him. Why'd you stop? Roxas let out a small groan. He'd been hoping Axel would take the hint and just shut up. He considered not answering and then decided to take the other route. He could possibly shock the redhead into leaving him alone.
Came out of the closet and all of a sudden I was an enemy in the locker room. Apparently being gay makes you a sexual deviant,
he said bluntly. Axel's eyes widened a bit and he seemed to have a moment of realization. So, when I came in and you were staring at me, were you checking me out? He demanded, pulling a pack of cigarettes from his pocket.
Yep.
Roxas answered honestly. Axel lit up his cigarette, inhaling thoughtfully. When he finally let out his breath, he held the pack out to Roxas. Want one? Roxas was, to say the least, completely shocked. He'd expect that to be the clincher, the thing that would make the redhead back off and avoid him like the plague. Instead, he just looked curious and thoughtful as he offered the pack. Never one to pass up a free smoke, Roxas grabbed one, pleased to see it was the same brand he used. Convenience at its highest. He let Axel light it for him before leaning back and doing his best to ignore the second presence in the room. Maybe that was rude, considering he'd given Roxas the cigarette in the first place, but he wasn't really in the mood to be civil at the moment. Axel waited until both finished their cigarette until he spoke again. How'd you know? Raising an eyebrow, Roxas made his way over to the window to dispose of the cigarette filter.
Know what?
He asked as he hopped on top of his desk, sitting cross-legged, facing the redhead. He was feeling a little bit less tense now that his nicotine was in his system, and since he had nothing better to do, he figured he might as well indulge Axel in the conversation. That you were gay? Well, that was unexpected.
I don't know. I mean, eventually it became kind of obvious. I'd find myself thinking about guys instead of girls. I was never really interested in girls, I guess. They were always just kind of there. The other guys would talk about which girl they wanted to fuck, and I wouldn't think about girls, that was for sure.
He trailed off, wondering why he was telling this to a complete and total stranger. Though, total stranger did look a lot like someone had just informed him pigs did, in fact, fly. Oh, he said quietly. Well, shit. I think I might be gay. Oh, so that's why he asked. Roxas stored this piece of information in the back of his mind for later use.
Well, congratulations. Welcome to the family.
He replied dully. I don't really know. Maybe you could help me? Axel looked suddenly hopeful. You know, see if I am or not? Roxas rolled his eyes and snorted, leaning back on his hands.
Please.
He sighed in annoyance.
I'm not going to have sex with you just so you can sort out your sexuality crisis.
Axel's eyes widened once more and he shook his head quickly. No way, no sex before the first date. He added that last part with the sly smirks, quickly recovering from the initial shock. I just meant a kiss. Roxas straightened up on his desk. A kiss was nothing. He could handle that easy.
Oh. That's all? Yeah, okay, sure.
He expected Axel to balk and turn away, muttering about how he'd just been joking and then spread the news the next day that the gay kid had hit on him. What he wasn't expecting, however, was for Axel to jump off his desk briskly, straight across the aisle, and kiss him. But that's exactly what the redhead did.